The meeting room's air conditioner hummed in a low, monotonous tone, as if it were as bored as I was with that endless presentation. I glanced discreetly at the clock, 5:45. 15 more minutes and I'd be free, at least until tomorrow, when it would all start over again. Marina, are you paying attention? Rodrigo's voice cut through my thoughts like a razor. I looked up immediately, feeling the heat rise up my neck. Every head at the table turned in my direction. 7 pairs of eyes watching me, some with pity, others with that glint of morbid satisfaction people get when someone is about to be humiliated. Of course, Rodrigo. I was just noting down some important points, I lied, holding up my pen as proof. He let out that short nasal laugh I had learned to hate over the last 6 months since he took over as manager. Noting things down, are you? Rodrigo crossed his arms, leaning back in the leather swivel chair he made a point of keeping higher than everyone else's. So tell me, what do you think of the proposal to integrate with the new system? Shit. I really hadn't been paying attention. I took a deep breath, trying to improvise something coherent. Well, I believe we need to consider the team's adaptation time and... Adaptation time, he cut me off, leaning forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You know what the problem is, Marina? You think like a 58-year-old. For you, everything needs time, caution, analysis. Meanwhile, the market rushes by and we're left here, standing still, waiting for you to adapt. The silence that fell over the room was so heavy I could feel its weight on my shoulders. Jessica, from finance, looked down. Carlos, my closest colleague, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. No one was going to defend me. No one ever defended anyone in Rodrigo's meetings. I wasn't suggesting we don't implement it, just that. Do you know what the average age is here at the company? He didn't wait for my answer. 32. 32, Marina. You're almost twice that. And you know why the company is hiring younger people? Because they're hungry, they have energy, they don't get stuck in the we've always done it this way mindset. I felt my fingers grip the pen so tightly I thought it would break. 23 years. I had been with the company for 23 years. 23 years of waking up at 6 in the morning, taking 2 buses, always arriving 15 minutes before my shift. 23 years of watching people like Rodrigo come through the revolving door, fresh out of a private college, with their diploma and their arrogance, thinking that 3 years of experience and a weekend MBA gave him the right to tell me how to do my job. Rodrigo, with all due respect, my age has never been an impediment to. Oh, here it comes. With all due respect, he made air quotes with his fingers, scornfully. Look, Marina, it's not personal. It's just that we need people who can keep up. People who don't need 3 days to learn new software, who aren't afraid of technology, who don't get a backache if they have to work overtime. The comment about the backache was low, even for him. Yes, I had been out for 3 days last month because of a herniated disc flare-up. But that had happened because I'd spent 10 straight hours preparing the quarterly report he had forgotten to request in advance and which needed to be ready for yesterday. I understand, was all I could manage to say, my voice coming out weaker than I would have liked. Great, Rodrigo clapped his hands once, as if he were closing the subject and not my dignity. So back to what matters. Jessica, you who are young and savvy, what do you think of the proposal? Jessica stammered something about cash flow while I stared at the glass table, seeing my distorted reflection on the surface. 58 years old. As if it were a professional death sentence. As if 2 decades of experience, of accumulated knowledge, of managed crises and solved problems were worth nothing in the face of a 35-year-old kid with gel in his hair and a designer watch. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. I left there feeling a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with my age and everything to do with humiliation. I grabbed my bag, put my computer on standby, and walked to the elevator. Carlos caught up with me in the hallway. Marina, are you okay? That was... I'm fine, Carlos, I lied again. It seemed that was all I did lately. Just tired. What he said was absurd. Totally out of line. And what do you want me to do? The bitterness in my voice surprised me. Go to HR and complain that my boss called me old? Everyone will say I misunderstood, that he was talking about the company profile, that I'm being sensitive. Carlos opened his mouth to say something, but the elevator arrived and I got in quickly, pressing the ground floor button before he could join me. I didn't want company. I didn't want comfort. I wanted to disappear from there. The subway and bus ride home was a blur. I found myself thinking of all the things I could have said, all the sharp comebacks my brain only manages to formulate hours after the event. Do you know how many of your projects I've saved, Rodrigo? How many times I've fixed your screw-ups without anyone knowing? But I hadn't said any of that. I had just stood there, quiet, swallowing the disrespect as if it were bitter medicine. When I got home, my husband Paolo was in the kitchen making coffee. "Hey love. How was your day?" I dropped my bag on the couch and threw myself down next to it. Rodrigo humiliated me in front of everyone because of my age. Paolo came out of the kitchen with 2 cups, handed one to me, and sat down beside me. "Again? Doesn't that kid ever learn? This time was worse." He said, I think like a 58-year-old, that the company needs young people with energy, that whole speech. "You should sue this company," Paolo said, and I knew he was saying it because he loved me, not because he thought it was a real option. "With what money, Paolo? With what time? I'd become the crazy lady at the company, no one would ever hire me again." We sat in silence, drinking lukewarm coffee, until my phone vibrated. It was a message in the company group chat. My stomach churned just seeing Rodrigo's name appear as the sender. "Everyone, important announcement. Tomorrow we'll have a visit from the regional CEO. I need everyone to be impeccable. Personal presentation is essential. Punctuality is mandatory." So that was it. Today's humiliation was just the warm-up because he was nervous about the boss's visit. Typical Rodrigo, unloading the pressure on whoever was below him on the corporate food chain. I had no idea that night, as I tried to sleep and planned to arrive even earlier the next day, that this visit would change absolutely everything. That fate, that abstract concept I had never taken very seriously, was about to prove it had a very peculiar sense of humor. And that Rodrigo was about to find out that humiliating people has consequences that not even he, with all his MBA and his arrogance, could foresee. I arrived at the office at 7:15 in the morning, 45 minutes before my normal time. The building was still empty, with that church-like atmosphere offices have before everyone arrives. Only the cleaning staff and the reception security guard, Mr. Waldemar, who greeted me with a friendly nod. I went straight to the women's restroom to check my appearance. I had chosen my best outfit, black tailored trousers, a navy blue blouse, and the blazer I saved for special occasions. A little makeup, enough to look professional without overdoing it. My hair tied in an impeccable bun. If Rodrigo wanted impeccable personal presentation, I would give it to him. I went back to my workstation and started reviewing everything. I organized my desk, answered pending emails, and prepared the reports I might need. At 8:30, the office started to fill up. Jessica arrived, then Carlos, then the rest of the team. Everyone seemed more dressed up than usual, more tense. Rodrigo showed up at 9 o'clock sharp, which was unusual for someone who normally arrived between 9:30 and 10. He was in a full suit, tie, and shoes so polished they reflected the ceiling lights. He walked past every workstation, doing a visual inspection, like a general reviewing the troops before battle. When he reached my desk, he stopped. "Marina, you look adequate," he said, and even what should have been a compliment sounded like criticism coming from him. "Good morning, Rodrigo," I replied, not giving him the satisfaction of seeing me affected. "Dr. Mendez arrives at 10. I'll need you to have all the financial reports from the last 6 months ready for presentation. Formatted, printed, organized in folders. Can you do that?" I wanted to say that those reports had been ready since last week, that I always kept everything organized and up to date, that I did my job properly regardless of any visit. But I bit my tongue. "Of course. They're almost ready." "Great. And Marina?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Today is not a day for mistakes. Or for slowness. Understood?" I understood perfectly. He was afraid. Afraid of looking incompetent in front of the regional CEO. And when Rodrigo was afraid, he became even more unbearable. At 9:45, I finished printing and organizing everything into 3 blue folders with the company logo. I placed them on Rodrigo's desk and returned to my station. He didn't even say thank you, just flipped through them quickly and nodded. 10 o'clock. The reception phone rang. It was Camila announcing that Dr. Mendez had arrived. Rodrigo practically ran to the floor's entrance, straightening his tie, checking his hair in the reflection of a glass door. The rest of the team and I positioned ourselves discreetly, waiting to say good morning when the CEO passed by. The elevator doors opened. And my world stopped. Because the man who stepped out of that elevator, in his perfectly tailored gray suit, his Italian leather briefcase, and his modern framed glasses, was no stranger. He was someone I knew. Someone I knew very well. It was Roberto. Roberto Mendez. My son. My knees almost gave out. I had to hold onto my desk to keep from stumbling. It had been 8 years. 8 years since I had last seen my son in person. After he graduated with a business degree and got that job in Sao Paulo, our relationship had become a series of sporadic phone calls, birthday messages, and promises of visits that never materialized. I knew he worked for a big company. I knew he had moved up in his career. But never in a million years would I have imagined he had moved up this much. That he was the regional CEO. That he was, at that moment, my boss's boss. Roberto saw me. For a split second, his eyes widened with the same shock I was feeling. But he was a professional, he always had been. His expression recomposed instantly, and he shook Rodrigo's hand with that polished, distant smile executives learn to make. Rodrigo, a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Roberto's voice was different. Deeper, firmer. The voice of a man who gave orders and expected to be obeyed. Dr. Mendez, the honor is all ours. Rodrigo was practically bowing. We've prepared everything for your visit. Would you like some coffee? Water? Later, perhaps. First, I'd like to meet the team. And he started walking through the office, greeting each person individually, asking their names, roles, how long they'd been with the company. Rodrigo followed him like an eager puppy, explaining who was who, trying hard to seem like a beloved and competent leader. When they reached my station, I felt my heart pound. And this is Marina, Rodrigo said, and I heard in his tone that barely disguised contempt. Our most experienced employee. She's been with us for 23 years. 23 years, Roberto repeated, looking me directly in the eyes for the first time. Impressive. It's rare to find such loyalty and dedication these days. I extended my hand, trembling on the inside but maintaining my composure on the outside. A pleasure, Dr. Mendez. When our hands touched, I felt a squeeze that said it all. Mom, I know. We'll talk later. The pleasure is mine, Marina, he said, and I saw something flash in his eyes. Pride? Sadness? Guilt? Rodrigo, is Marina your longest-serving employee? Yes, sir. And what is her evaluation? How has her performance been? The question caught Rodrigo off guard. He hesitated, and I saw the wheels turning in his head. He couldn't speak ill of me openly in front of the CEO, but he didn't want to praise me either. Marina is competent. She knows the old processes well. Sometimes she has difficulty with faster changes, adapting to new technologies, but nothing that compromises her work. Old processes. Difficulty with changes. Even in front of the CEO, he couldn't help but belittle me. Roberto nodded slowly, his face a neutral mask. I see. And you, Marina? How has it been working under Rodrigo's management? The question took me by surprise. It took Rodrigo by surprise too, because he tensed up beside me. Everyone in the office seemed to stop breathing. I had 2 options. I could lie, say everything was wonderful, maintain the corporate charade everyone expected. Or I could be honest. But how could I be honest with my son about his manager without sounding like a complaining mother? It's been challenging. I chose my words carefully. Rodrigo has a very different management style than what I was used to. He values speed and youth, which sometimes creates an interesting work environment. Roberto smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had just heard exactly what he needed to hear. Interesting, he repeated. Rodrigo, can we talk in your office? I want to review some numbers. Of course, of course. This way, doctor. They walked away, and I let out a breath I'd been holding for minutes. Jessica approached me discreetly. Are you okay? You turned pale. I'm fine. I lied for the 100th time that week. Just nervous about the visit. But it wasn't nervousness. It was a whirlwind of emotions. Shock at seeing my son there. Pride in what he had accomplished. Sadness for the distance that had grown between us. And a tiny, almost imperceptible, glimmer of hope. Because Roberto had asked those questions. He had looked at me that way. He had squeezed my hand in that manner. My son had seen the humiliation I was suffering. And something told me he wasn't going to let it slide. The meeting between Roberto and Rodrigo lasted 2 hours. 2 long, tense hours during which no one in the office could really work. We all kept glancing discreetly at the glass-walled office, trying to decipher what was happening inside. Rodrigo gesticulated a lot, showed papers, smiled in a forced way. Roberto just listened, impassive, occasionally making notes on his tablet. When they finally came out, Rodrigo was sweating. Literally. There were beads of sweat on his forehead, and that smile was starting to crack at the edges. "Thank you for your time, Dr. Mendez. If you need anything else." "Actually, I do," Roberto interrupted him. "I'd like to have lunch with a few team members. A random selection. I want to get a real sense of how things work here." Rodrigo's face turned white. Of course. I can select the most." "No," Roberto was firm. "I'll choose." "Marina," he looked directly at me, "do you have plans for lunch?" All heads turned in my direction again, but this time it wasn't out of humiliation. It was out of sheer disbelief. "No, sir." "Excellent. Carlos, is that your name?" Roberto pointed to my colleague. "You too. And Jessica, right? The 3 of you will have lunch with me. Rodrigo, you don't need to come. I want to talk to the team without management present. I hope you understand." Rodrigo understood. He had no choice. But the expression on his face was of someone who had just swallowed a whole lemon. "Perfectly, doctor. It's an excellent idea to hear from the operational base." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in an expensive Italian restaurant, the kind of place I would never enter on my salary, looking at a menu without prices and trying to understand how I had gotten there. Roberto waited for the waiter to take our orders and walk away before speaking. "You can relax. This conversation is off the record. It won't go into any report. I just want to understand what it's really like to work at that branch." Carlos and Jessica exchanged nervous glances. No one wanted to be the first to speak ill of their boss to the CEO. "With all due respect, Dr. Mendez," Carlos began carefully, "we understand you need feedback, but it's complicated to speak openly when there's a hierarchy." "I understand your concern," Roberto cut him off gently. "But I assure you there will be no retaliation. In fact, the more honest you are, the more helpful it is for me and for the company." Jessica looked at me, as if expecting me, the eldest, to take the lead. I took a deep breath. "Dr. Mendez, may I be frank? Please. The work environment has been toxic. Rodrigo has a way of leading that neither inspires nor motivates. He humiliates, he belittles, he plays people against each other. And he has a very clear prejudice against older employees." I felt my voice tremble, but I continued. "Yesterday he told me, in front of the entire team, that I think like a 58-year-old. As if my experience were a defect and not an asset. He said the company needs young people with energy, implying I have neither." Roberto said nothing, but I saw his jaw clench. "That's not an isolated incident," Carlos joined in, emboldened now that I had broken the ice. "He does it to everyone. He creates a climate of fear. We work well not because we want to, but because we're afraid of being the next one to be humiliated. And the turnover is horrible," Jessica added. "In the last 6 months, since he took over, 5 people have quit. Good, competent people. They left because they couldn't take it anymore." Roberto noted everything on his tablet, his face a mask of professionalism. But I knew my son. I could see the contained anger behind those eyes. "And the results? The productivity?" "It's dropped," Carlos said. "We deliver because we have to, but no one is making that extra effort, you know? That dedication that makes a difference. Why? Because no one feels valued. Marina," Roberto turned to me, "you've been here for 23 years. You've had other managers. How would you compare Rodrigo to them?" "I've had 6 different managers in these 23 years, I answered, holding his gaze. Some were better than others, but they all had one thing in common, respect. They could disagree with me, they could correct me, but they never disrespected me because of my age or experience. Rodrigo is different. To him, loyalty and experience are worthless. All that matters is appearing modern, young, dynamic. Even if it means stepping on those who support him." The lunch continued with more questions, more honest answers. Roberto was meticulous, wanting details, specific examples. When we finished, it was almost 3 in the afternoon. "Thank you for your honesty," Roberto said, putting away his tablet. "You have no idea how much this has helped me." We returned to the office in silence. Rodrigo was at the door, trying to look casual but obviously anxious. "So, Dr. Mendez? A productive lunch?" "Very," Roberto replied. "In fact, I need to speak with you again. In private. Now." They went back into the glass-walled office. This time, the meeting was short. 15 minutes. But when they came out, Rodrigo was completely white. Roberto had that serene expression powerful people have when they've just made an irreversible decision. "Everyone, may I have your attention for a moment?" Roberto called out, and we all gathered around. "I want to thank you for your hospitality and inform you that I will be making some structural changes at this branch. Rodrigo will be transferred to another position within the company, effective this Monday." The shock was palpable. Rodrigo looked like he was going to be sick. "But, Dr. Mendez, The decision is final, Rodrigo. You will receive all the details by email." Roberto turned to the rest of us. "As for the new management, I will be interviewing internal and external candidates. I want someone who values experience, who builds teams, not destroys them." He paused, looking directly at me. "Marina, could you stay a few minutes after hours? I'd like to discuss a few things." I nodded, unable to speak. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of whispers and shocked glances. Rodrigo stayed locked in his office, probably updating his resume. When everyone left at 6 o'clock sharp, I was left there, alone with my son for the first time in 8 years. Roberto closed the meeting room door, and for a moment, the executive CEO mask fell away. It was just Roberto. My son. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke. "I didn't know. I didn't know you worked here. I didn't know that. How could you have known?" I hugged him, feeling the tears stream down. "We barely talked, you were so busy, I was too." "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for having grown so distant. For not visiting, for not calling more, for—" "Stop," I interrupted him, holding his face like I used to when he was a child. "You've built an incredible life. Look where you've gotten. I always knew you would go far. But at what cost?" He pulled away, running a hand through his hair. "Today I found out my own mother was being humiliated at work and I didn't know. What kind of son am I? The kind that just served justice." I smiled through my tears. "Roberto, you had no way of knowing. And what you did today, that was incredible." "That was the bare minimum," he said firmly. "Mom, I read all the files. Rodrigo is a disaster as a manager. Declining results, high turnover, 3 complaints to HR that were hushed up. I would have removed him anyway. The fact that it was you just made it all the more urgent." "And now?" "Now I need to find a decent manager for this branch," he smiled. "And I need my mother to help me with that. You know this team better than anyone. You'll be my unofficial consultant in this process. And after that, we're going to start over. Sunday dinners. Phone calls. Real visits. I'm not going to let another 8 years pass, Mom. I promise." The following Monday, when I got to work, there were flowers on my desk with a card, "For the most valuable employee in this company. With love and respect, Roberto." Rodrigo had cleared out his office over the weekend. His transfer was to a non-managerial position, in a small branch in another state. Fate really did have a perverse sense of humor. 3 months later, a new manager took over, Paula, a 45-year-old woman with 15 years of experience and a leadership style that valued every team member. The atmosphere changed completely. And me? I continued on with my 58 years, my 23 years at the company, and finally, with the respect I had always deserved. Because age isn't a demerit. It's an achievement. It's accumulated wisdom, battles won, storms survived. Rodrigo learned, the hard way, that humiliating people has consequences. And sometimes, fate puts just the right person in the right place to ensure those consequences are delivered. Today, when I look at Roberto's graduation picture on my desk, I smile. My son didn't just grow professionally. He grew as a person. And I couldn't be more proud.